It is Wednesday, my dudes, which means it's time for another First Thoughts and Initial Impressions Epic 7 video. This one will be on the final aespa collab member, the apparent whackbot enthusiast herself, æ-KARINA. As with all of these videos, I'll be giving you my 2 cents on everything, whether I think the character is good and you should pull for them, where I think they might potentially be good, as well as my thoughts on not only the skills, but how I think they should be played. And spoiler alert, I think Karina is definitely a character you're going to want to pull because I think she's an incredibly flexible unit. I don't think she's the most amazing unit, but she is fairly flexible. And hopefully, after we watch this S3, that will become very apparent.
I got you! Bye-bye! Hi, I'm æ-KARINA. My rocket punch will blow you away.
Similar to the other aespa collab members, æ-KARINA's voiceover artist is not credited in the video, but I'm assuming that it can be found under the Voices and Expressions tab later on in the game once she becomes available on December 22nd. Moving on to her stats, æ-KARINA is surprisingly an Ice Knight of the Aries zodiac symbol. She's the only aespa collab member to not have a unique stat line. And if she was going to share a stat line as a knight, I'm so happy that it is an Aries Knight. If you've watched any of my videos in the past, you know that Aries Knights are my favorite stat lines in the game because this is the stat line that is shared by Red Lilius, Red Cecilia, Blue Tywin, and of course, Bellion. So she is in very good company with this stat line. Taking a look at those stats, she has 821 attack, 6,751 health, 110 speed, 648 defense, 15% critical hit chance, 150% critical hit damage, 3% dual attack chance, 18% effectiveness, and no starting effect resistance. Imprint release is health percentage for the team, which is super useful because this character is most likely going to be an anti-aggressive character, so extra imprints help you shore up that job. And the imprint concentration is defense percentage, which is also fairly good because, spoiler alert, this is a defense scaling character for all of the damage in her kit. Overall, though, Aries Knights continue to be my favorite stat line for this class in the game. The attack is low, however, the health is very high. Defense is fairly good. It is the highest starting speed for a Knight class, or at least very close to it. I believe there might be a few outliers like, say, Falcon or Clury, who might be slightly faster, but 110 is definitely up there when it comes to speed ratings for a Knight. And then finally, she has some starting effectiveness, which is super useful because she does have some debuffs actually in her kit. Moving on to that kit, it is going to be her S3 first, which is called I'll Blow You Away, which is a phrase I commonly associate with Sirmia because of how often I hear the thing. You acquire 3 souls upon use and has a 3 to 4 turn cooldown depending on Malagora. Attacks the enemy by slamming them with a fist, decreasing defense for 2 turns, before increasing the speed of Karina for 2 turns. A successful attack will deal additional damage proportional to Karina's defense to all enemies. Damage dealt increases proportional to Karina's defense. This is a fairly good S3. It's not the most broken one on paper, but it is still fairly good. First, let's get the negatives out of the way. Obviously, you have to land a successful attack. So this character is obviously not going to be the best into a lot of dodge-based characters. Your Aidens, your Violets, and so on and so forth. I guess this is to offset the fact that you're getting a bunch of true damage at the end of this move to the entire enemy team based on her defense. Now, we have to see the multipliers on this move, but it is a super interesting move because there are quite a number of ways that you can go with this character just based on how I'll Blow You Away pans out. First off, you could build this character with a bunch of critical hit chance and critical hit damage based on the multipliers on it. And then obviously scale her defense sky high so that you get a very strong single target attack on I'll Blow You Away. And when you couple that with the true damage on the S3, it might be possible to use her like a single target nuke. Think of her like a little Queen Charlotte. I think that is a fair comparison for this character because it is a single target attack that gets some level of splash damage. So you can go really high crit damage and some defense to get big single target bursts. Or you can go really high defense. For example, a character like Green Armin builds sky high defense, like 3,000 defense, in order to get the biggest burst, AoE burst out of that character. Depending on the multipliers and the splash damage, you might want to actually forego those damage stats and just go as high of a defense as you can get just in order to get the biggest amount of splash damage to the team. So that's pretty good because we already have a pretty flexible way of going with this character. Either we're going to be going big single target burst, or potentially very tanky bruiser that specializes in doing a lot of AoE true damage. And that is before we talk about the other skills in her kit, which might paint her as something like an off tank with a thing like, say, Adamant Shield. So moving on to her S2, it is a passive skill called Rocket Punch, which is incredibly disappointing to me because somebody with my gaming background, Rocket Punch has a legacy that you absolutely need to live up to because it either translates to a very powerful OTG combo or some kind of touch of death kill, assuming that you actually have enough meter. Hence the Whackbot/Sentinel reference from Marvel vs. Capcom at the start of the video. Anyways, moving on to the passive, when the health of an ally, except for Karina, after being attacked, is 50% or less, increases the combat readiness of Karina by 35 to 50% depending on Malagora, and activates Leave It to Me. Leave It to Me can only be activated once every 3 turns. Leave It to Me is a non-attack skill that increases the defense of the caster for 2 turns and grants a barrier to all allies for 2 turns. That barrier's strength increases proportional to Karina's defense. Now, the barrier in the video from Leave It to Me is not particularly too high. It looks to be about like maybe 15 to 20% of everyone's actual health total. That's probably going to mean that it's going to translate to maybe 3,000, 4,000 health barrier. So you're looking for probably similar or slightly worse performance than like a Fallen Cecilia barrier, depending on the multipliers. We really would have to actually see that. The biggest complaints I have with Rocket Punch as a passive are the 3-turn cooldown on it, when most other passives at this point, Epic 7, are going to be a 2-turn cooldown, but I guess this might be negligible because, stating the obvious here, this is a passive that is meant to try to help you weather the storm against very aggressive or cleave-based strategies. If a character on your team ends up taking a critical hit that puts them very, very low on health, the Rocket Punch passive is supposed to try to actually save you with this barrier, as well as the defense buff on Karina herself. So yeah, the long cooldown, when it's compared to other ones, is definitely a knock against it, but in those scenarios where you'd want it, it might not be so bad. Other things that I am not super fond of on this move, the defense buff is very much appreciated in this character's kit because it will increase the damage of the S3 as well as the damage of the S1, which we'll be talking about next. However, it's stuck to a conditional that may not actually proc in certain game modes. Like, for example, if you're playing like Bruiser versus Bruiser, Rocket Punch might not actually trigger, which means that you might need another way to actually give Karina defense on your team, like character like, say, Adventurer Roz, or just get really lucky with an artifact that gives it, such as, say, like Music Box. So yeah, not the best way for her to get an increased defense, but I'm at least thankful it's in the kit. The biggest glaringly obvious problem I have with this passive is it doesn't specify if it triggers if the character is actually dead. For example, if my opponent uses Green Sid and uses his S3 hack and kills somebody on my team, do I get Rocket Punch? Because they technically are less than 50%. They're at 0%. They are deado. So that is one of the biggest things I think we need to see for Karina. I'm leaning on the fact that that's probably not the case. The character probably has to survive. They didn't show in any of the actual combat trial videos this move proccing off of a character being killed in one hit. They specifically show Watcher Shuri use his S3 and Apocalypse Ravi survives, whereas in most cases an attack buff, Watcher Shuri is probably still killing your Apocalypse Ravi, or at least, again, coming very close. If the character dies from somebody like Sid or Watcher Shuri, do I get this passive? Because that is definitely going to be a metric that I think a lot of people are looking for. Rocket Punch is on paper a fairly good anti-cleave skill. You do get defense buff on one person, and you do get a barrier, and that is very nice. And then you also get a CR push, which is the primary way you're trying to just stuff aggressive or cleave compositions, because you're essentially getting the character to take the very next turn in retaliation for somebody on your team actually being killed. But again, really need to see, does it proc if a character is actually killed? Because if it does, then this character is a fantastic pickup for anybody that is really struggling to play against aggressive strategies. I still think, though, again, on paper, Rocket Punch is a fairly competent anti-aggressive skill. It's just not super amazing, I feel like, in a lot of standard versus standard compositions. But to me, still a good passive. Paints a picture of a character with a pretty defined role. And that is, thankfully, a role that I think a lot of players are really looking for. Because, again, speed is not as common as, I think people seem to think it is. Not everyone has high speed. Many times, a lot of players are stuck playing the role of the turn 2 player, the tank down player. So having a character like Karina with a skill like this is obviously, again, very, very coveted. Moving on now to her basic skill, her S1, it is called Exposed. Attacks the enemy with a fist with a 65 to 75% chance, depending on Malagora, to decrease the defense of the target for 1 turn. Damage dealt increases proportional to the caster's defense. And then where is a soul burn effect here, consume 10 souls to increase this effect chance to 100%. And decreases defense of the enemy for 2 turns. Very akin to Alencia there on that soul burn. Exposed is a fairly solid S1. Have to see the multipliers. If it has very high damage multipliers, like if it's a bit better than, say, maybe Fighter Maya or Designer Lilibet, then I am all for it. Again, really need to see those multipliers to determine how strong it actually is. But on paper, it is a fairly competent S1. And it really does help solidify the character in doing a lot of different roles. Overall, I think Karina, to me, is the most exciting character to come out of the aespa collab because the character is playable in so many different scenarios. At the end of the day, a character like Winter or Ningning is probably going to have more of an impact on PvP if I'm, playing the safe bet. I'm hoping I'm wrong. I'm hoping Karina is very, very good. But this character just does a lot. You get a lot of value for this character. As opposed to Giselle last week when we talked about Giselle. Giselle's burst mage. She is a damage dealer first and foremost. We have a surplus of those. There isn't really anything that jumps out that she does that other characters don't do. She seems to be kind of like a character that's like really good in the Nightmare Labyrinth, but just all right compared to other characters. And I don't see her value super long term because of how linear she was. Karina is a character that does a lot. When it comes to PvP, she is a decent World Arena bruiser. She is probably playable in standard versus standard, although she probably isn't as good a character as, say, Shu, for example. And there's obviously going to be other very powerful DPSs like your Spectre Tenebrias that probably will have precedence over her. But she is probably still a decent play there if you are looking for a blue damage dealer. As an anti-aggressive character in World Arena, again, probably a pretty good character there as well. Might not be as good as a character like, say, Bellion, but that character is usually pre-ban, or not as good as a character like, say, Armin, but still has some use. And remember, this is a knight who does have a survivability passive on her, so she can absolutely be built with no damage, very high defense, very high HP, no real speed, and hold something like Adamant Shield and function kind of like as a brick wall tank, and you leverage the CR push and rocket punch for her to actually get value off of the character. So that is definitely another way that we can take the character. On top of that, the character seems like she has decent potential in Guild War as well. If you ever run into those teams with very low HP characters like your Spirit Eye Selines, for example, the character is technically a true damage nuker with her S3, so she does have some actual usage there. Again, we're always starved for blue damage dealers. If you run into specific compositions, I have no doubt that Karina could be very, very good, depending on the build, with things like maybe Counter Set, her artifact, which we'll talk about in a second, maybe even like an Elbrus Ritual Sword. The character might even be viable as a Guild War defense unit. When we look at the PvE side of things, Karina also does quite a lot here. Whereas Ningning was basically your budget DJ Basara for PvP, with just very middling PvE usage compared to a character like Tamarin, and Winter seems wholly focused on being kind of like a single target stunner, much in the same way that like Solitaria would be, although without the PvE applications. Karina just feels good in PvE. She does a lot. If you watch the video, obviously Smilegate has shown that Karina can be used as a tank in Wyvern 13. She does fit that well, very well. She is a blue knight which is very, very good for being the front line, obviously, in Wyvern 13. She also has debuffs to help new players, and it is a very coveted debuff, which is Defense Break. Defense Break is probably the best debuff you could probably ask for in Wyvern 13. So she has that covered on not one, but 2 moves as well, and then she does give herself not only the CR push if we end up getting very low on health with somebody else from the team off of, like, say, the shield phase, but also you get the speed buff from the S3. So there is a lot going on there for a newer player. And even if you're a veteran player, it's not hard to look at their video and see that with a replacement of a character like, say, Mui on their team, if you replace that with a character like, say, Karin, for example, that Karina could absolutely be used to enable a Wyvern 13 one-shot. So good for new players and veterans alike when it comes to Wyvern 13. And this is before we talk about any potential uses she might have in something like, say, Labyrinth or even Advent in the future. If you've watched any of my Advent clear guides, I commonly use a character like Fighter Maya to cheese boss strategies in those very, very difficult game modes. This character feels very akin in some ways to Fighter Maya. It is a high defense scaling character that specializes in single target damage that is of the Knight class. Yes, Fighter Maya is more resilient because of things like her self-defense buff and also her self-cleansing. That is a big drawback of Karina. But it's not like we couldn't use Karina, especially on those Advent floors where we really need to have like 3 blue units, for example. I definitely can see her having some inherent value there. So again, Karina is not like an 11 out of 10 slam dunk pick in every scenario. But this character is like a Swiss Army knife with a lot of options. And generally, at least in video games, not so much in Epic 7, but in video games, the sign of a very good or a top tier character is a character that has a plethora of options. The fact that Karina feels like she could be played on like counter unity or like speed defense, and she could be built both fast and slow with either variation of those things, like even like maybe like destruction unity, for example, that might also be something that is on the table for this character. I don't know. You can go a bunch of critical hit damage and crit chance based on the multipliers, or you can go supremely tanky. Remember, this character does have Bellion stats, so at the end of the day, you could make a character that is got like 20-something K HP as opposed to the 16K that they show in the preview, along with some sky-high defense, and again, either have her be a decent chunk of speed, like in the 170s, 180s, or just have her be absolutely base speed of 110. Character just seems incredibly rock solid in so many areas, and that's why I think that I'm going to pull for her, and you probably should pull for her as well. And that's even before the fact that we talk about it's a limited, so you should just pull every limited character. Wrapping up the video here now, let's talk about Karina's artifact, which is Rocket Punch Gauntlet. After attacking with a single target attack, has a 50 to 100% chance, depending on the artifact's level, to inflict additional damage to the target. Additional damage increases proportional to the caster's defense. This should look really familiar to some of you. This is Spear of a New Dawn for defense scaling units. And Spear of a New Dawn is really good. And it's also a super whale artifact because you really want to have it at plus 30 if at all possible. So if you were on the fence about which character to blow all of your aespa bookmarks on, this is probably the banner you're going to get the most value off of it, because even if Karina doesn't play Rocket Punch Gauntlet, a character like Fighter Maya absolutely can take advantage of it. And who knows, even in the future, there might be another defense scaling knight that could really take advantage of this. Remember, Spear of a New Dawn is incredibly powerful, even though there's only a select few characters that can use it, like Senya and Red Charlotte. I feel very much the same about Rocket Punch Gauntlet. This is a artifact that, if it's playable, if it's good, it's really good, and you're going to want to have 6 copies of it if at all possible. So if you are looking for something to blow your free bookmarks on, you just can't decide which girl, I think that either the Ning Ning banner to get her kind of remixed version of Magaraha's Tome, or Karina's for her Rocket Punch Gauntlet are definitely good pickups. After that, it is probably going to be Giselle, just because it is a modified version of Symbol of Unity. So that's pretty much how I would rank them in terms of banners of overall value, because Karina is a character that has an artifact you want lots of copies of, and she can absolutely make super good use of her imprints, both for the team as well as the single target imprint. When it comes to other artifact options for this character, Again, we've already talked about Adamant Shield, but previously you could pair her with a character like, say, Fallen Cecilia, so she kind of functions as an off-tank in tandem with her. Is that going to be the best? Probably not, but it's absolutely an option. Another thing that could be very, very good is if you go for like a meme counter unity build with like Elbrus Ritual Sword, depending on the damage that this character actually has on the S1. Like if she has crazy high multipliers on the defense, you could do what we talked about before. Go base speed on like counter unity with Elbrus Ritual Sword and really leverage those crazy multipliers and those crazy defenses breaks on her. So that way she kind of, again, functions kind of similar to like a weird Armin or like a Fighter Maya on Elbrus Ritual Sword. So that is also a possibility. This character, really flexible. It's very difficult for me to kind of like formulate an opinion of like just how good she's going to be because the character can be taken in so many different ways. And as I've already said, in video games in general, top tier and high tier characters are characters that have a plethora of options. Why do you think that a character like Asaria is so good in PvE? Because she can do everything. She can be your debuffer. She can be your defense breaker. She can be your utility. If you want, she can also be your damage carry. Character is just stacked to the gills in the kit and can do so many, many things. I feel very much the same way about Karina. She is very flexible for not only PvP, but also PvE. So if you're on the fence at all, if you are somebody who cares about either of those game modes, there's definitely something to look forward to here with this character. And those are my thoughts on æ-KARINA. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. If you did, please, as always, leave me a like or a subscribe. Helps me out here a ton. And if I missed anything, as always, let me know down in the comments below. I will hopefully see you guys somewhat soon. I do have some streams planned for this weekend or potentially next week, health permitted. I am still pretty much entrenched and battling some very serious health issues. So hopefully those get resolved very, very soon. Look forward to seeing you all in the next one. Have a good one now.